Greetings. We are now looking at the last chapter of Search for a Nonviolent Future, which is, you see on the back behind me, is in Arabic. This chapter is going to be a little bit more difficult for me to describe and give you pointers for because it's more of an appeal than an explanation, but it's no less important for that. It really was an attempt on my part to evoke the compassion that we really need as an emotional perspective to understand the logic of everything else that I was saying. I will point out that on page 260, I talk about human beings ignoring the warnings of nature, which are reflected to us in the innocent eyes of children, in that English painting, and that was, of course, prophetic because we've now ignored the warnings of global overheating and climate imbalance to the point where life on planet Earth is threatened. And since that time, since Search was written 10 years ago, Metta has adopted global warming as a key issue that we want everybody in the world to focus on. We want it to be solved in 4 to 10 years, and we want it to be solved through nonviolence, and we want it to be solved in such a way that we come out of it with an activist community ready to roll on from there. So I have to say that was prophetic, and though I've said that chapter 9 is not a logical exposition, it's more of an emotional appeal, there is one kind of logic to it, what I call the metaphysics of compassion, and that is the vision of the world as a system which is organized through unity and diversity. That is, living systems are characterized by diversity, where the apparently inert systems studied by classical physics were characterized by uniformity. And when you translate that into human social terms, and you can appreciate the diversity of everyone and not just accept or tolerate, but to reverence diversity as necessity for the unity of life, then you have the worldview, which, if you put it together with the emotional energy of compassion, you have a complete nonviolent person. I didn't quote it at the time, but it's become almost a mantra for me and for us at Metta, if you will. It's a wonderful remark of Martin Luther King Jr. I cannot be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. You cannot be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. Completely subverting the very violent perspective that your happiness has to be sacrificed for mine. That becomes impossible in the real logic of nonviolence. Unless your happiness is fulfilled, mine cannot be fulfilled. And so it's you and me against the problem every time, not ever, never you against me. Another kind of prophetic thing that happens in this chapter, for purposes of Metta anyway, is on page 265. I talk about a connection between nonviolence and the human self-image. So it's become more and more clear to us that the chief importance of nonviolence, even though its importance in solving political and social problems is so huge, it has an even deeper importance, if you will, in that it tells us something about who we are. And I noticed when I was teaching nonviolence that people in various countries, when asked, why are you doing this nonviolently, they would say, because we are Filipinos, or because we are Polish, or so that their self-image nationally was tied up with their choice of nonviolence as a method of change. And taking that a little bit deeper, for every single one of us, our capacity to fulfill ourselves and to reach our human destiny is directly proportionate to how efficiently and how accurately we can seize on this notion of nonviolence, especially spiritually based nonviolence, as Gandhiji gave us in his great legacy. Now, remembering our humanity and forgetting all the rest, a student of mine had said in a course just before I wrote the book, humanize your enemy and let your enemy humanize you. When someone, this is where we come full cycle back to the basic logic of nonviolence that we started with chapters and chapters ago. that when someone threatens you, the tendency is to reduce that person's value in your eyes until you reach a critical point where you no longer are thinking of them as a human being, and then all kinds of violence becomes possible. When people are doing it to you and you refuse to go along with it, and you take the additional step of not dehumanizing them, then you've broken out of the old paradigm. And with the remarkable thing that you see at this point is that conflict is a great opportunity. And especially the threat of violent conflict, if we never had to face it, I guess we would never become fully human. Because as Gandhi said, it's only really nonviolence when you love your enemies. Otherwise, up to that point, it's just, humanitarianism and kindness and all those things are very important. But when your human feeling and your sense of kindness is challenged and you refuse to collapse under that challenge, then you are becoming nonviolent. And this is a potential, and I would say it's therefore an obligation for every single one of us. So if you will, that's the final message of Search for a Nonviolent Future. I hope you have a wonderful time teaching it. Please be in touch with us about any questions or issues that come up for you. Thank you very much.